안녕하세요. I'm Brian, and yeah, this will be about Miden, and in particular, what we're pushing in the space of privacy. We're building a practical privacy enabled by this solution called Miden Guardian. In a nutshell, it's a compliance infra that makes privacy actually usable and relatable to the institutions. All right. Right. So at this current stage, everybody's talking about onboarding new institution, onboarding new Web2 users, but everything is public. Just recently what happened was, I consider myself a crypto veteran per se, but, when I was transferring my money from my wallet to another, I got address poison. It's a fairly simple attack. If you don't know what address poisoning is, literally is, because my balance is public, I transfer $1 to my friend for testing, and then because that $1 is public, a bot detected it and then traced it back, saw my account, and I had some money in that account. So what that attacker decided was transfer another fake money to my address and faking as that was my previous $1 transfer. And just because of that mistake, what I did was instead of transferring to my friend for the rest of the money, I transferred the money to the attacker, and then my money was gone. And all of this was because, of course, my silly mistake, but the privacy part that wasn't implemented in this sort of a blockchain use case. And we can only assume if there's more users starting to use blockchain in this sort of a public setting, then this will only be a more significant risk. Right. So, and same thing for institutions. If they wanted to be onboarded on this blockchain ecosystem, there's the security and there's cost of visibility where some regulatories requires privacy actually. But let's say if the institution decided to use a complete privacy layers, then there's no compliance per se, and you cannot configure it. Once the money goes in, it's kind of hard to validate if this is a clean money or no. There's no in between there. And this sort of practical privacy of Miden, what we're trying to achieve is we are private, yes, but it's programmable, making it where you can program it to your compliance standards, where it is built for institutions that has specific compliance needs. So let's first, before getting into the Miden Guardian, I think it's important to understand how Miden sort of is different from all the other blockchains out there. So on Miden, unlike on Ethereum and on Solana, where it's just one account where every balance on your account is public, on Miden we have two types of accounts. One is public, another one is called private. Right? And public account would just behave the same as all the accounts out there on Ethereum. All the balances, all the transactions are publicly visible. So it will be on the top side, the blue part. The entire state is committed on chain, and Miden blockchain records the entire state. But for private accounts, this is something very unique to Miden. I don't think any chains out there has it, which is we have this private account where the entire state actually just lives off-chain. It's not an encrypted state on-chain. It's actually just literally off-chain and only a commitment on-chain. But of course, this exposes a risk, right? If your private account state locally, the off-chain part, is lost, then your money's gone. Even if you have private key, your money's gone because you don't have the private state anymore. You don't know how much money you have because we don't encrypt them and save it on-chain. But the other way around, it makes it extremely secure and private in terms of the public blockchain's perspective. And also because of this structure, it makes the blockchain hyper-performant and super parallelizable. So Miden Guardian, it's sort of a private account, but a assisting services for private accounts, where Miden Guardian is a non-custodial compliance layer for private accounts on Miden. And that literally means it's sort of because there are some shortages in private accounts, we want to build an enhanced version for it, enhanced services, and that's the Guardian. And first thing that it does, it does the state backup and recovery. So let's say if I have a private account on my phone, so the private state only lives on my phone. So by connected to this Guardian service, what will enable is my private states locally on the phone will be automatically, just like Google Cloud, is being synced to the Guardian services. So even if I lose my phone, lose my private accounts, the state still lives on, and I can recover it later with the Guardian. And another module in the Guardian is we can enforce compliance enforcements. This is something I'll talk about in a bit, but eventually every transactions that go through on the private accounts on Miden, also the Guardian has to co-sign it. So Miden Guardian is actually a multi-sig design, so which we'll get to in a bit. But during that process, before the Guardian signs the transaction, it checks AML or those kind of compliance policies to make sure it complies before it signs the transactions. And then the third part, it's the multi-sig part, where Guardians have no access or no ways to move our funds, but it does. But for us, we cannot also just move our funds on our own. We always have to work with Guardian for this sort of a privacy Guardian account. But of course, you can run your own Guardian. Guardian repo itself is open source. So you can run your own backup Guardian services. So then you can move your own fund with your own will. But regardless, you always wanted to make sure your state on your local phone and the Guardian services, they stay in sync. That's why every transaction has to be co-signed by both parties. Except the one when we wanted to change the Guardian, that we'll talk about in a bit. Yeah, and then that part will be the multi-sig and then the syncing part that I was talking about. But I think it's easier to explain it through a diagram actually, so let's jump into it. But let's first compare what are the advantages of public account and private accounts versus, Guardian protected private account versus the other two. So for public accounts out there, all data is on-chain and there's no privacy, which is known. For private accounts, all data are on device, on your local device where you have the private key and public key with. And that device has the state, and it's the only device that has it. If you lose it, then it's gone. But it's completely private. But with a Guardian protected private account, the on-device has its own copy of the private state, but the Guardian also hosts a copy of the private state as well, so that even if you lose your device, it has a copy of it. And let's come down to the compliance and security section, where on public accounts, whatever transactions that I do, it's against the smart contract. And it doesn't do any sort of compliance checking or anything, and it's visible to everybody, no policy rules apply. And for private accounts, because everything happens via the private accounts, it's private, meaning the transaction is private, no one can validate whether your transaction is actually compliant or actually being sanctioned. And also, it's not visible to everybody. But when we get to the Guardian protected private accounts, we have this compliance programmable module where you can actually implement a specific AML settings for transaction screening to make sure, even if it's private transactions, they're actually a compliant private transactions. And of course, additionally, you can add spending limits, controls for further security purposes. And then last but not least will be the recovery and coordination. For public accounts, it's very easy to recover your account, right? As long as you have the private key to your public account, all the states are on chain, then you just need to read the chain state, and you download it, and then you have it. That's the public chain, public account. But for private accounts, if you lose your device, it's gone. Even if you have the private key to that private account, your money's gone because you cannot construct your previous state. So you don't know how much money you actually have on your account. But then for Guardian protected account, there's always backup on the Guardian side, and it's a multi-sig style. So Guardian can never spend your fund, but it helps protect your fund and protect your account's integrity. So think of it as like, let's say we have like this sort of a mobile, let's say a bank, right? Chase Bank or maybe Bank of America, or in Korea it's like Kookmin Bank, right? It will means like I open an account, and this account I can connect it to Kookmin Bank, I can connect it to Chase Bank, to any bank, but while using the same, while having the control of my account itself. Usually in this current world, when we register an account on the bank, they own our account, right? And then whatever transfer that we do, we have to go through them, and then they can actually transfer our funds inside their service too, right? Because that's just the Web2 design. Nothing wrong with it, because we trust them, and then they have their stakes on it with the credibility. But the more ideal case would be, we want it to be more non-custodial, but also they provide their services, which would means, because it's a multi-sig style, even though they provide this additional backup and it's sort of AML screening, spending limit control, and even yield generation, these kind of things. But they have no way to move our funds because they don't have the additional key. They only have one key. It always has to be a two-key signed transaction to move the funds. So from the bank's perspective, they never own our money. They are only helping us managing it. So it's just a more trustworthy setup for normal day-to-day users. In short, I would say like 4 steps of how Miden Guardian works. User will hold their own sets of private key, and a Guardian hosts the state backup, and then every transaction there's going to be a compliance enforced, and then recovery when needed. When we have a new device registered, etc., the state is in the Guardian side, so we can just download it. But we're going to go through this in a diagram. So yeah, maybe this is a little bit hard to understand in text. All right, so this is a technical architecture. As you can see, in a Guardian protected private account setup, you always have 3 keys. You can have more, yes, but default is we have 3 keys. And a hotkey, and a code key, and a Guardian key. So hotkey is usually used for day-to-day transactions. So let's say when at the beginning, when we're registering a Guardian-backed private account, what we do is you create a private account, and then once you created that private account, you have a hotkey that is associated to that private account. And that private account will connect it to a Guardian services, and then you fetch the public key of the Guardians back to your account itself. So now your private account is officially registered to Guardian services, and then whenever you need to do a transaction, we can follow that green line right there, is we need to build the transaction itself on the blue box. Once we built it, we sign it with our hotkey. That's one signature. And then we pass over the signed transaction, the transaction that we built and we signed over to the Guardian. And a Guardian has their own set of key, which is, we call it service key, but Guardian key. And a Guardian will actually sign that transaction. That's the cosign part on the yellow arrow. So that's 2 signatures already. And then with only with 2 signatures, then your transaction can be processed. So then you submit it on chain onto Miden chain, and then Miden will start processing it, etc. So that means every transaction has to go through this process. Every transaction has to be signed by 2 keys for security and the state sync properties. But let's say if I lost my device, right? I lost it, but I still have the private key to my hotkey, or maybe I have a private key to my code key, right? What I would do is I would just pull up another phone, and then in this another phone, because previously when I set up my Guardian account, the Guardian already knows my second key, my code key, the public key of it. All he needs to do is my signature from my code key, and then I sign it, and I tell Guardian, hey, I have this code key, this is me, please give me the state. I want to download it to my phone, and I want to start using it again. And then you'll be able to sync and download the private state that you save on Guardian, and then start transacting again. And then, of course, like whenever you feel like this Guardian is kind of slow, it's not responsive, or maybe like, I don't know, there's a liveness issue, or maybe it's just like, yeah, it's just not working as you want it, right? Maybe you want some additional features in Guardians where some other Guardian has it, but this Guardian don't have. For instance, maybe the money that you have that you interact via this Guardian services is generating yield on another Guardian one, with another Guardian one, but this Guardian doesn't have such service. So you want to swap a Guardian, right? What you do, it's like the rotation of the Guardian is you sign it with your hotkey and your code key together. That's also 2 over 3 transaction, and then you can swap out the Guardians. And that's the only transaction that is allowed to use your code key and hotkey together. Normally, the hard requirement is you always have to have at least one of the hotkey or code key signature, and also the Guardian signature. The Guardian signature is must require for all transactions, besides the rotation. So overall, that's how Guardian works, and this is how we achieve a non-custodial private wallets for normal users. And here's a little animation. Hopefully it will play. All right, so here's a Miden user. And Miden user will try to initiate a transaction, and they created the transaction, will pass it on to Miden Guardian, which is all off-chain at this state. And the Miden Guardian will check for compliance and all of that. It has this additional internal module for private transactions. And then once it checks the compliance is passed, okay, this is a valid transaction. Then it's going to co-sign the transaction and then generate a proof because this is client-side proof transaction. And then it will send over, oops. Yeah, and then it will send over to Miden chain, and then voila, yeah, the transaction is accepted. So every transaction that is created within this Miden Guardian protected private accounts is compliant. That's the enforcement part, where institution can actually leverage. They can program the compliance module to whatever behaviors they want. Maybe say, hey, you cannot transact with, you can only transact if you're KYC verified, or you can only transact if your bank balance is above something. Any rules that they want, they can enforce it in this Guardian side. And the bank would just have to run the Guardian on their own. So yeah, this is like how Guardian operators can enable compliances where they can do transaction screening. They can actually enable policy controls in terms of, okay, maybe spending limits. If there's like, maybe if users' device is lost, someone got it and then they got over the passcode and then they can actually produce some fake actions, then they can actually do some IP control, where a geo-based sort of a control on the policy. And audit trails, right? Obviously, like we don't want people to launder money for the better world, right? Like we want a better world, so we want to make sure the audit trails are actually being attested, is compliant. And then last but not least, the private states. It's additional backup services that every user will feel more secure about when they're using private accounts. So at this stage, it was built with OpenZeppelin, and then the repo is open source. We're going to have at least 3 to 5 sort of a Guardian service running when we go mainnet, which hopefully is June or July. So yeah, this is something that we think is going to change how people interact with blockchain. Just like Canton has their super validators, I think that's the name, and Tempo today just launched like privacy zones. That's also one of the concepts. Their approaches are all different, but the similarity there is privacy requirements for different parties are different, and you cannot push it universally on the protocol level. There are the fundamental properties that can, but per country, per use case will have different privacy requirements. And you need to provide those sort of isolated zones, economic zones, for your privacy use cases. And Guardians is what we envision to be that use cases, backbone for it. And it's only the beginning. If you want to talk about, if you're institution developers, or if you're really interested to learn more about Miden Guardian, or just Miden in general, talk to me. I hope you enjoyed it. But if you wanted to just try out how Miden Guardian actually works in a nutshell, or look into the docs, there's this multisig.miden.xyz. That's where you can play around with how Guardian-enabled multi-sig service will work. Overall, I think that's it. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Brian.